in the early 1980s, Neal Israel and Pat Proft co-wrote the comedy Police Academy. Shortly after that finished filming, they wrote the comedy Bachelor Party, with Israel directing. Both movies ended up being released fairly close to each other, with Police Academy releasing in March of 1984 and Bachelor Party in June. The movies were very successful, especially Police Academy, which went on to be the 6th highest-grossing film of the year. With back-to-back hits under their belts, the duo were approached by producer Joe Roth. Roth had previously worked with Israel on his directorial debut, Tunnel Vision. Roth's idea was, how about a comedy in the vein of Police Academy, only about traffic school? Israel loved the idea. A few years earlier, he was pulled over by a cop who discovered he had 13 outstanding tickets and a moving violation he had never settled. So after spending the night in jail, he had his license revoked until he attended traffic school. The whole process was miserable, but Israel thought it would be great for comedy. He went to various traffic schools and interviewed the people working there, looking for ideas or some crazy events that happened. Unfortunately, all the tales he heard were extremely boring, so there wasn't any material worth putting in the script. The duo took a story from writers Paul and Sharon Borstein and wrote the screenplay in about a month, although they changed the name from Traffic School to Moving Violations. The script takes place in a fictitious city. It was about a group of people who, for various reasons, all get sent to traffic school. While there, they uncover a plot devised by a crooked judge who's using the traffic school for her own financial gain. The gang of misfits takes on the judge and a crooked cop in a way that involves numerous hijinks and shenanigans. They went to shop the script to studios, and with the demand for this type of film being high, they were greenlit within a week. The studio wanted to get this out quickly, so they had to be fast. This made the director nervous. He was just married to director Amy Heckerling, who was going to Italy to film National Lampoon's European Vacation. He had a sinking feeling that there might be too much of this type of movie out there, and he shouldn't do the movie after all. Instead, he should just go overseas with his wife. Getting a movie off the ground is usually a much more intricate and difficult process, and he had a bad feeling because this was all too easy. Against his judgment, he decided to move ahead with the job. They went location scouting and worked on casting. The locations were going to be tricky. No city wanted a movie to be filmed there, which made their cops look bad, so they invented the fictional location of Birch County. They envisioned the place as a very modern but somewhat sterile location. They were going to be filming in 1984, and some of their ideas were influenced by the book. They decided to film in and around locations in Los Angeles, but to use various techniques to make it difficult to tell exactly where they were. The donut hole is the only easily recognizable location in the film. It's a real donut shop in La Puente, California, that's still in business today. Once they had the general locations, they started casting. For the evil cop, they cast James Keach, the younger brother of actor Stacy Keach. He was an actor who'd been working since the 70s on TV shows like Kojak and movies like Evil Town. He'd be playing a motorcycle cop, much like he just did in National Lampoon's Vacation. A young Jennifer Tilly was hired to play Amy. This would be her second film, with her first being no small affair in 1984. Brian Backer was hired to play Scott. He had just previously played Mark Ratner in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. The director hired some actors he had known for a long time. He hired Sally Kellerman to play the evil Judge Henderson. He knew Fred Willard from the comedy troupe Ace Trucking Company. He was hired to play Doc Williams. They filled the rest of the cast with comedic actors Ned Eisenberg, Wendy Jo Sperber, and Nedra Voles. The duo worked with Wendy Jo Sperber in Bachelor Party and loved her. The director said she was one of the funniest character actresses of all time. In 1984, the fast food chain Wendy's introduced a very successful marketing campaign.
Where's the beef?
The elderly actress Clara Peller became an overnight sensation, and this retired manicurist went on to become a household name. On top of all the Where's the Beef merchandise, Peller appeared on talk shows, Saturday Night Live, and was hired to play Emma Jean in Moving Violations.
Where's the beef?
Right here, ma'am.
In 1982, Robert Conrad turned down the role of the chief in Police Academy, which he later regretted. So when they called him about a small role as the chief in Moving Violations, he took the job. For the lead, they needed someone who was handsome, charismatic, but also a bit of a shyster, and they had the perfect guy, Michael J. Fox. Fox was eager to do the role, but the studio thought he was too young, so they passed on him. This ended up working in his favor, because he went on to replace Eric Stoltz in the monster hit Back to the Future. They continued casting and found the right match, John Murray, the younger brother of Bill Murray. He had the right amount of goofy charm and did seem to be channeling much of his brother's style. As I said, things were moving fast. With the locations locked down, they were ready to start filming. This was only about 6 weeks after the film was greenlit. They started filming in late 1984. For the Harbor Freeway in LA, they covered the signs with Birch County. They filmed many of the airport exteriors at LAX. They needed a modern-looking courtroom, but all the courtrooms in the area were very old and traditional-looking. They found what they were looking for in Brea, California. Beyond that, the location they found also had some great-looking modern exteriors, which they were able to use. To make the locations look different from their real-life counterparts, they covered up much of the skyline with plate shots and matte paintings. Clara Peller was very hard of hearing. The director had to shout his instructions at her, and even then, she still couldn't hear. They finally got to a point where they would just shout her lines at her, which she then repeated. When the director was in college, he had a job as a traveling puppeteer for the Nassau City Park System. He'd drive these portable stages to locations and put on puppet shows. At one show, his stage rolled down a hill, which gave him the inspiration to make this happen in the movie. Although what happens in the movie was much more ridiculous. The puppet trailer was motorized, and there was a guy who was driving in there that you can't see. For a comedy, the movie had an overwhelming amount of stunts, which most people don't even think about because it's a comedy. When the old ladies are leaving the airport, they drive onto the runway and in front of an airplane. LAX wouldn't let them do this, so they found a site for decommissioned airplanes in the Mojave Desert that let them film the stunt. The drivers in the car were stuntmen. They used a long lens, so it appears the plane is much closer than it is. It was still very dangerous. They had a cannon in the back of the car that shot out the bowling balls. The Crisco Wendy drinks was really apple juice. Part of the way through filming, they had to do 3 weeks of night shoots. They found a railroad that would let them do the car scene, where Loretta was stuck on the tracks. They had the stunt doubles push the car out of the way. Israel couldn't sleep during the day, and shooting at night destroyed his sleep cycle. The shoots ran all night, and with him not being able to sleep during the day, it made him into somebody he wasn't happy with. Initially, he was just cranky, but then it turned into a short temper, and finally, after 2 weeks, he snapped. He flipped out at everyone, and then was so overwhelmed he started crying. He managed to get through the 3rd week, and was able to get back to a normal schedule. Joan's diagnostic scene was shot at a vocational college in Santa Clarita, California. The zero-gravity sex scene was done with the actors on wires, which are pretty easy to spot in the Blu-ray. The animated clothes were done using single-frame animation. For the close-ups to make the actors look like they were floating, they had them standing on a trampoline. The house at the end was in the suburbs of Simi Valley. There was a neighborhood that was just built, and none of the houses were sold yet, so they worked out a deal to rent one of them for the shoot. They converted the garage to make it look like the living room, so they could drive the car through it without causing any structural damage. They had a special-made police car for this scene. The body of the car was on backwards. There was a stunt driver in the back who could see out a hole and was able to drive the car forward while it looked like he was going backwards. The big chase at the end was an homage to the Keystone Cops. The whole chase sequence took about a week to film. The movie had a few cameos. The director and his brother Robert have cameos as the guys on the bench. Israel's also the voice on the driving video.
Blood flows red on the highway.
Jamie Masada owns the Laugh Factory in Hollywood. You can see the Laugh Factory shirt under his apron. The secretary is Pat Proft's wife, Karen. The technical advisor, Nino Candido, was the cop giving the weapons lecture. It's not a cameo. Don Cheadle was the Juicy Burgers employee. This was his first movie. The director loves girl fights and puts them in as many films as he can. This one was no exception. Although years after the film, Sally Kellerman was still hounding him for making her wear this outfit. The movie would have received a PG, but they had a great joke in there where Loretta drops an F-bomb.
Yeah, fuck him!
Which pushed them into the recently made PG-13 territory. The shoot ran for 60 days, which was incredibly long for this kind of film. After editing, they screened it a few times, and the director felt one scene needed a little something extra. When the puppet trailer crashed into the funeral, it originally ended there. The director took a camera over to his brother's backyard, dug a hole, and launched the casket into it. The co-writer, Pat Proft, was one of the gravediggers. The movie was released on April 19th, 1985. Everything came together so fast. From the time when the script was written, all the way till the film's release, was under 6 months. The movie didn't do particularly well. It opened in second place, with first place going to Police Academy 2 in its 4th week. Audiences were somewhat hostile to the film, since it was promoted as from the creators of Police Academy. They were accused of ripping themselves off. Also, despite Police Academy 2 doing well, audiences were losing interest in this type of film. Between Caddyshack, Police Academy, Stripes, Vacation, European Vacation, and others, the market was just flooded with goofy comedies. The movie made about $10.5 million in its theatrical run, a far cry from the $150 million Police Academy made. While Israel enjoyed working on the movie, with the exception of the night shoots, he knew he should have listened to his gut. Israel and Proft co-wrote Real Genius, and then went off to do their own things. Israel didn't direct again until Breaking the Rules in 1992. He then made Surf Ninjas in 1993. He continued writing and directing, but started doing more TV, with shows like Clueless and Dog with a Blog. Pat Proft continued writing, and had massive success moving to another type of comedy, the parody spoof, with films like Hot Shots and the Naked Gun trilogy. Also, while it was a massive box office flop, he wrote the screenplay for one of my personal all-time favorite comedies, Brain Donors. Most of the cast went off to do quite well for themselves, with the exception of John Murray. Casting directors felt he was just too similar to his older brother.
Wait a minute here. I can't believe I'm hearing this.
He had a few small parts over the years, and this ended up being his only starring role. Moving Violations is an entertaining madcap comedy. It doesn't hold up as well as some of the earlier Police Academy films, or the other slobs versus snobs movies like Caddyshack. Some of the jokes are genuinely funny, but unfortunately, many of them have been recycled over the years, so if you're seeing it now for the first time, some of the jokes will be ruined. John Murray did his best, but really, he does come off way too similar to his brother. That's not his fault, and I do feel bad for him, but still, I just kept thinking about Bill Murray every time he spoke. I mean, Brian Doyle Murray, the oldest brother, figured out a way to be funny but different, and he was quite successful for himself. Israel's come around in the movie over the years, and says that he does find it funny. It was just a victim of timing. Too much, too similar, too soon. Israel and Proft did create some of the best comedies of the 80s and 90s, and while Moving Violations might not have been on par with the others, it's still a film that I'm glad exists.
Jamie, come sit on Grandpa's lap.